All right, that's my cue.
If just before we begin, I'd like to introduce Lilia. So thanks for coming today, Lilia. A lifelong Brantford resident, Lilia graduated in 2021 from Laurier Brantford with an honors BA in history with a minor in public history. She was hired on at the Brant Museum and Archives as a summer student in 2017 and continued on as a full-time staff member in the fall of that year, and now spearheads the seniors outreach programming that the museum provides. So what a great fit for us today. Additionally, she assists with offering children's programs at the Myrtleville House Museum, and that's in Brantford as well. While working at the Brant Museum and Archives, Lilia has had a hand in many aspects of collection work, reorganization of collection spaces, digitization of archival documents and photos, as well as curation of many exhibits. Lilia has had a passion for local history and museum education and is continually looking for opportunities to add to her experience in those areas. And she adds in her spare time, she enjoys crocheting, playing baseball, and spending time at home with her cat. And sometimes we see cats join the Zooms on these days. So welcome, Lilia, and thanks for coming.
All right, well, thanks for having me. I was going through some technical difficulties, so Linda's going to help me out in terms of changing the slides for my presentation. So yeah, like was mentioned, our presentation today is a very brief history of how hat styles have changed over the years. So if we go to the first slide. There we go. So one of the earliest hats that was found was discovered with the mummy of this gentleman here. His nickname was Otzi the Iceman, and he was discovered in September 1991 in the Alps between Austria and Italy. And he's Europe's oldest known natural mummy. So he was preserved in ice in high up in this mountain range. And he died roughly in 3230 BC and was preserved in the ice until his discovery. So if we click forward, we can see that he was found wearing a bearskin cap with a chin strap, which was made of several different hides that were stitched together. So essentially resembling what we now know as a Russian fur hat, but without the ear flaps. Okay. So in the Middle Ages, hats for women specifically ranged from simple sort of headscarves just wrapped around their head to what's shown on the screen here was known as a hennin. So essentially just a cone with fabric coming out of the top of the cone. And this hennin, depending on the size and the shape, sort of was a denotation of social status. And the term milliner comes from the Italian city of Milan, where the best quality hats were made in the 18th century. So millinery was traditionally a women's occupation, with the milliner not only creating hats and bonnets, but also choosing lace, trimmings, and different accessories to complete an entire outfit. And today, a hat maker makes hats for men, and a milliner makes hats for women. So if we click through again. So Lock & Co. is the oldest hat shop in the world. It was established in England in 1676 and is still operated by the same family today. So they fitted hats for various members of the British upper class, politicians, including Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt. So I'll click through again. So they had long topped the heads of British statesmen, but never the head of state until Queen Elizabeth II. So they worked in conjunction with the Crown Jewelers, Gerard & Co., and they worked in partnership to make the coronation crown, worn on the 2nd of June, and it was viewed by over 20 million people worldwide. And over Lock & Co.'s 348-year career, they worked on multiple movies as well. So including Goldfinger, Kingsman, and The Darkest Hour. So I've got some images of them if we click through as well. So Goldfinger, Kingsman, and Gary Oldman playing Winston Churchill in The Darkest Hour. All right. So what I never knew before putting this presentation together was how intricate the structure of a bonnet was. So on the screen there is a diagram showing the different parts and structures of the bonnet itself. And by the 1830s, bonnets in the Victorian era had grown to really huge proportions. So they were typically sort of large hooded coverings covering the face. And ones made for indoor use were typically made out of different fabrics like silk and satin, whereas straw hats were typically used for outdoor use because the straw was a little bit more of a structured material that would last a bit longer in the elements. And the outdoor straw hats were typically adorned with handmade flowers as sort of a decorative piece there as well. By the 1830s, or sorry, by 1840s, the size of bonnets sort of became a little bit smaller. And by the 1850s, the size of the bonnets decreased again, so that a little bit more of the face was exposed. And on our diagram, at the bottom of the bonnet, there's a little ruffle called a bavellette. And the bavellette ribbon at the back of the neck was put there specifically to cover the back of the neck. So it was kind of a I am blanking on the word, but just to cover the back of the neck so it wasn't exposed. It was a little risque for the time. So I believe on the slide here, there should be, if we click through, there's different examples of bonnets as well. So our 1830s is the large one on the left-hand side with the feathers coming down. The 1840s is the straw bonnet in the center of the screen, and 1850s is on the bottom there with the green sort of plaid ribbon. Alrighty. So 1861 was kind of an important year in terms of Victorian fashion. So with the death of Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, that sort of kickstarted the idea of mourning wear. And this was a very common way for women to express their grief. So some of these hats had veils to sort of hide their face. Typically, they were either black, gray, or lilac, depending on the stage of grief that the woman was in, and often would be decorated with dyed ostrich plumage. So the different stages of mourning really depended on your relationship to the deceased. So it's typically 2 years of wearing black for a deceased husband, 1 year for deceased children and parents. And then it kind of shortened with the distance of how you were related to the person. So if we click through, I've got some examples there as well. So yeah, all in black, typically a black veil over the face as well. And then what? There we go. Yeah, just keep clicking through and the photo should show up. Yeah, so at the end of the Victorian era, the style of hats were really going in two different directions, either very, very small, like the one we can see here, or just ridiculously large. Let's keep going. Yeah, and feathers were very common practice in terms of hat decorations there. Not only feathers, in some cases, entire birds. So that one there is an example of a hat from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's a silk bonnet with birds from about 1890. Yeah, and there was a practice in England in terms of using feathers. It got, I don't want to say a little too out of hand, but it got to the point where certain types of birds were very popular to use in hat making. So the monarchy actually passed a law prohibiting the use of certain bird plumage to protect that species from going extinct. So the Edwardian era is when hats got quite large. It was common in that era for a woman's silhouette to kind of resemble an S shape. So larger hats and bustles of the skirt were popular in that time. We've got some examples here of it from a catalog in about 1905 of different hats and ribbons and their adornments. And then there should be some other examples here on the slide as well if we click through. So, yeah. All right. So, and with the large hats came the practice of using hat pins as well in order to keep them in place. And hat pins could vary in length as well. So the longest ones that we have in the collection here at the museum are about 8 or 10 inches long. And they would just poke through the brim or the crown of the hat, and you would kind of tuck it through your hair underneath to keep it in place. And hat pins kind of served a dual purpose of you could use them to keep your hat on your head, or you could use them to protect yourself from unwanted advances from gentlemen at the time. And hat pins themselves were quite ornate as well. So the pit or the head of the pin that was still visible on the outside would be often quite decorated as well. We have some ceramic ones that are in the collection here at the museum. There's also other ones that are adorned with little gemstones and things like that. And just another image from the Edwardian era there is, yeah. And it wasn't just the ladies at the time. So even even the younger, young kids wouldn't be seen outside without a hat to finish their outfit as well. Into the 1920s. So 1920s, we all think, especially in terms of ladies' fashion, is kind of the flapper era with the shorter skirts and the cloche hat. So as seen on the left-hand side of our screen there. And the cloche was popular for more than just the 1920s. So it was in fashion from about 1908 into the early 1930s. And cloche is a French word for belle, which we can see in the shape of the hat. And it was designed this way to kind of accent the shorter haircuts that women were wearing at the time. Also, during the 1920s, decorative headbands were quite in fashion as well. That way you could see more of the ladies' hairstyles that weren't entirely covered up by the hat themselves. And another image from a 1920s catalog that I was able to find. So just the different shapes of the cloche style hats. So some with short, sort of smaller brims, others with more prominent brims there. Into the 1940s, with women becoming more active in the workforce in World War II, hats and headwear were more practical than decorative. So often, especially in the 40s, materials and fabrics for hat making were really rationed during the war, and styles were more influenced by a military look. So the image that's here, that first image there was called a snood. So it's almost a crocheted sort of hairnet, essentially, to keep the lady's hair in place. And bandanas at the time were popular as well. So this is an image of a Canadian woman. So this was Ronnie the Brown Gun Girl. So she inspired the image that we all know today of Rosie the Riveter. And with the movie Casablanca, fedoras were quite a popular style as well. Into the 1950s, we see hats really inspired by Christian Dior, the designer there. And these hats would be really shallow, almost like the head or the cap of a mushroom in style, rather than the earlier sort of belle cloche style hats. So a lot narrower, and they would kind of sit just on the top of just at the crown of your head, rather than being a little bit larger there. And then we have, yeah. All right, and into the 60s, with ladies' hair becoming quite large, the hat styles had to kind of adapt to the changing hairstyles. And this is when a hat style called the pillbox became quite popular in women's fashion. So it just kind of sat, yeah, just at the back. Smaller hats sat just kind of on the crown of your head. Florals and different pastel colors were quite popular here as well. Uh, and our sort of fashion icons at the time, Jackie Kennedy, Audrey Hepburn, and Queen Elizabeth II. Really influenced what was in style and in vogue for hat styles there. All right, and men's hats. So the style for men's hats hasn't changed too much, but there were some changes there. So we have an image here from about 1910 showing the different styles of top hats, or different sizes and styles of top hats. And the top hat really was the popular choice up until about 1849, when a gentleman named William Bowler came on the scene. And he changed the style drastically with a sort of shorter, more rounded look that was to be worn to the races. And uh, so this bowler hat became popular in England, and it was known as a derby hat in America. So if you hear somebody refer to a derby hat, it's the same thing as a bowler hat. So the bowler hat was worn typically by lower middle classes and top hats still by upper classes there. So we have some images from the museum's collection. The gentleman on the right-hand side is a young Alexander Graham Bell, showing off his outerwear outfit there. And yeah, so we have our different examples of bowler hats. And a more decorative look. So these were known as smoking caps, popular from 1875 till about 1900. The smoking cap and jacket there that the photo of our gentleman is showcasing. The smoking cap and jacket were typically worn. If you think of in Downton Abbey, where the men and women split after dinner, and the men go and have cigars and drink port, they would wear the smoking cap and jacket in an attempt to keep the smell out of their hair and out of their clothes. Whether or not it actually worked, I'm not entirely sure, but it was, yeah, kind of yeah, it was an attempt, anyways, to keep it out of their clothes. Yeah. Alrighty. Another diagram showing just different styles of men's hats. So we still see top hats, the bowler hats there, and then the fedoras, and coming into style there as well. So a photo on the right-hand side is from about 1920, showing the different styles of men's hats that were popular. All right. And this photo here, I believe is one of the cockshut men, want to say Edmund and his wife, while they were on their honeymoon in the 1880s. Yeah, and just another example of early men's hats there. These photos from the museum's collection. So the decline of hat wearing, mostly due to sort of societal expectations and just etiquette and formality changing. So World War II, as I mentioned before, the concept of wearing hats sort of declined after the war, and it was mostly due to practicality. So people having to, so yeah, and then apologies here. So the etiquette was changing, practicality. A lot of hats were typically handmade as well. You're thinking more just like winter hats and like beanies and toques. rather than the sort of more ornate, larger hats of the early 1910s and 1920s. Typically, the kind of more ornate, fancier hats were just worn to church in the 1950s, 1960s. And there was a short resurgence in hat wearing in the 1980s with Princess Diana affecting ladies' fashion styles there as well. Okay, and then I believe our next few slides, I have images of hats from the museum's collection. So I would have, typically when I go out to seniors' homes doing this presentation, I bring some of the hats from our collection to show to the residents. We have about 200 hats in the collection, all very, we're sort of running out of storage here at the museum, so we've gotten quite skilled at squirreling things away. So let's see. Okay.
Not sure why, but it's not forwarding.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, this is okay, so this is an older version of the presentation. So let me see. Okay. Apologies for our technical situation here. Okay. Okay, then let's. Yeah, so I'll just chat about them. So some different. We have quite a number of ladies' hats in the collection. So different cloche styles. Our pillboxes as well. We do have a number of men's top hats and bowler hats, as well as a large number of different like military and firefighters helmets and hats as well. We have some larger ones. Early firefighting helmets I think are really cool because they sit quite tall on the wearer's head. One of the most interesting hats that we have in the collection, in my opinion, belonged to Harry Cockshut in the 1920s, and it was a collapsible top hat. So when it was collapsed, it was only about 2.5 inches tall, but because there was a hinge mechanism on the side of the hat just above the ears that you could press the top hat completely flat for an ease of storage, and as well if you were attending a show, say at a theater, you would wear your top hat into the event, find your seat, and then collapse the top hat as the presentation was on so you wouldn't obstruct the view of the person behind you. And that one is still in quite good condition. It's made not out of like fur as typical top hats would be. It's made more out of like a synthetic material. Yeah, but it's quite interesting. I should have pulled it out of storage. I apologize, but yeah, so that is kind of the end of the presentation. So I am more than happy to take questions, and I will do my best to answer them. I am by no means an expert on different hats and